Hello everyone. Discussion called What We Have Learned from Helping Refugees from Ukraine Become Part of New Communities. Topic is hard and difficult. That's why I think our tent is a little bit empty. But the theme is very important, and I think that people will come more and more here. So first of all, let me introduce our panel. So Bella Fox, Belarusian immigration policy management expert. Hello, Bella. Also, Karolis Žibas, United Nations Refugee Agency integration advisor for the Nordic and Baltic countries. Hello, Karolis. Eglė Samuchovaitė, asylum and migration expert from Lithuania Red Cross. And Dmytro Mamaiev, Ukrainian PhD student at the Lithuania Center for Social Research. So thank you for being here. And today we are still facing an emergency situation in Lithuania called when we talk about immigration. If before the war in Ukraine, we received about 500 asylum requests per year, today we have over 60,000 refugees in our country. The humanitarian aid delivery system was created in just 3 days, which became the basis for now. So today we ask the main question: what should we do next? Do we have a vision of long-term integration of refugees? So before jumping into the lessons learned from the response to Ukraine's situation, Eglė, could you please give us a short overview of how approach to integration process in Lithuania have been changing throughout the years?
Is it working? Yeah, good. So hello everyone, thank you for being here. I wanted also first of all to thank Open Lithuania Foundation for having this topic in the agenda. And I think that we are lucky here today to have Bella and Dmytro. And it's a very rare occasion to listen to people who are actually affected by our integration policy, how they feel it in their everyday life. And I think that that's the aim of the discussion today, not only to hear from myself and Karolis, but also to hear from two refugee background having people living here in Lithuania. Now, if we look back to the history of how integration has been regulated throughout the years, so the first bylaw on integration have been adopted in 2004. And honestly speaking, the then understood concept of integration was provision of services. Nothing about community, nothing about person itself, nothing about the state policy, nothing about the society accepting, but more we are providing the services and that's it. Hopefully the person will integrate. And honestly speaking, this concept was valid until 2020. So it was quite a number of years how long we had just the understanding that we only have to provide services and then integration will just go by itself. In 2020, there was a change. And I think that was one of the main changes in our integration policy, including the importance not only of person himself and its capacities, motivation, but also including then what is the state policy, what are the systems in place for the person to be supported, but also including society, that the attitudes from the society is also very much influential of how successful integration of the person can be. So the first aspect which I wanted to mention was that the concept of integration itself throughout the year has changed. Another thing, when we look back, integration was always exclusive only for refugees, for those who received subsidiary protection, refugee status, and now what we have with temporary protection for Ukrainians which arrived after the armed conflict started in Ukraine. In my opinion, we should go beyond and to look into the integration more from the needs perspective. If I'm in need on support for my integration here in the country, because you can easily be a migrant on work ground or family reunification ground, and you you can easily need the support because of your different vulnerabilities. So the second aspect is more on how it is understood, is this one. And when we look now back, I think exclusivity is one thing, that it was some of the people were exclusive and were not receiving any support for integration for throughout the years. And we only had numbers of like, mostly in the last 10 years, like 400 people who have been receiving refugee status or subsidiary protection. All the system was very much centralized, which means that all municipalities were left aside and they were never included, neither in service provision, and they never had this ownership of the people who are living in their territories. And so the third aspect is that the system was too much centralized, and that the challenges which we are facing right now, it's very much related to that. And the last point which I wanted to mention in the beginning is that from what we see also, that the integration policy became very much selective and fragmented, which means that we have one system for Ukrainians, another system for Belarusians, another system for Afghans who were evacuated from the Kabul. I mean, different systems, although the need for the support is the same, and the reasons why people leaving their countries of origin also are the same. So I'm not taking any more the floor and giving back the microphone for you.
So Karoli, Eglė started to talk about the lessons a little bit. So what the lessons we have learned and what we still need to learn about integration here in Lithuania or on Baltic states?
Thanks a lot, and good afternoon to everyone here. Yeah, I think I would start from, if you remember in 2015, 2016, where Lithuanian government signed the EU relocation scheme agreement to welcome more than 1,000 people from Syria and other countries. And that has been the huge debate on whether we do have capacities or not to welcome a couple of hundred of people. Now suddenly, after 7-8 years, we have 80,000 Ukrainians coming, and we are welcoming them with open arms and hearts. So my first conclusion is that apparently integration is not a rocket science. Yeah, we have been thinking about it, so overthinking or overcomplicating the thing that we cannot do this and that, but suddenly thousands of people are coming to your municipality. You're just picking up the phone, do the job. And sometimes you see that you do this in quite accessible way. And this is what we have been observing in many municipalities, that, as long as you don't have people like a target group for integration policies, you could consider yourself as, I'm still, as a municipality, as a system, I'm not still ready to do that. But suddenly when you have thousands of people arriving, inevitably, organically, you do the job. So that's one part. And I think that what this situation in Lithuania showed to us is that we can do that. And quite a few municipalities that I've been observing already moving towards the Nordic model. And that's where we have a problem. Because the Nordic model of integration is sustainable over time and space, which means that it's funded by the government, by the state budget. It's really decentralized. They have integration law, which clearly stipulates the roles and responsibilities of municipalities, which means that the municipalities, they have obligation to work on integration. So that's the sustainable Nordic approach. What we have until the Ukraine situation here is basically where you are outsourcing integration to the non-governmental sector, because that's easy to do, because you have 1,000 of refugee population in your country. So it's easy to do that through one-stop shop agency in a couple of municipalities with a larger concentration of migrants or refugees, and then you do the thing. But then suddenly when you have 80,000 instead of 1,000, inevitably, no matter you want or you don't want that, you need to mainstream integration services for municipalities, because it's not possible to outsource NGOs for 80,000 people. That's basically the job for the municipalities. And this is why we have different model, where opposite to the Nordic model, we have a centralized system where the NGOs are playing the leading role, and we don't have clear role of municipalities, because basically municipalities should take the leading role in any response with the support of local communities and with the support of NGOs. In our case, is basically the NGO efforts, they replaced the municipal mandate for integration. But now, organically, because of the large numbers of arrivals, the model moves from from our Baltic centralized model to more mainstream model of decentralization, what we have in the Nordic countries. And I think this is where actually organically you really go, towards that more sustainable model. So I think this is where actually we can really learn from the other countries and from the municipalities to do the jobs. I think these are the two perhaps main thing. And then the third thing, what I think Eglė has already mentioned, but this is where we pay the price for a project-based nature of integration system. And that's clearly, you have a very targeted measures for different groups, which sometimes are okay, but in the longer run, it might be counter-effective. By saying counter-effective, I'm saying that this is not sustainable. Yeah, so that means that, integration is never-ending process, let's be honest. Yeah, sometimes it takes 5, 7, 10 years to be integrated. But even with the Lithuanian passport, if your color of your skin is black, you can still, experience discrimination even though you have the citizenship. So integration is never-ending process. And how we try to address integration with the fragmented project-based services, which is really difficult. So, and that's where I would say the Nordic model, which is more sustainable. This is the example where we can really go from, instead of having 5 projects for different 5 groups, towards a very sustainable process of mainstreaming. And I think this is where we should definitely look, and perhaps organically and naturally, that's where our municipalities are going. But the one thing is that, Eglė already mentioned that we had an action plan and etc. But I really hope that in the longer run, we will have the real integration law, which will lift our thinking and approach from having an NGOs and unclear role of municipalities, a very straightforward integration system where municipalities will PDK central law, and then the NGOs will support them and fill the gaps what municipality cannot do.
Okay, thank you. Of course, we are very glad that we have Bella and Dmytro here. As Eglė mentioned, that it's usual that when we have some discussions in Lithuania, that politicians are talking, institutions are talking about the integration, but we cannot hear voice from communities. So, Bella, how long you are living in Lithuania? And very simple question: are you feeling welcome here? Do you feel good here?
That's not an easy question to answer. Hello, everyone. I'm here since 2020, and I already see that the discussion is led such way as if in 2020 almost 100,000 Belarusians didn't come at all. And wherever I go for discussions, we immediately jump into the war conflict happening in Ukraine, and we skip all those years when Belarusians were coming. And I think that the reason for that is that Belarusians could be labeled as temporary permanent. This is a migration term when the person comes to the country with no expectation to stay longer, which was my case as well. So I came with the humanitarian visa, escaping the regime after being imprisoned and kidnapped for nothing, which is basically comparable to the horrors of the military conflict affected Ukraine today, because of the amount of violence used against the peaceful citizens when you have no option whether you go or not, when you are not coming peacefully on your own, but when you run as a real refugee. And then after 1 year of activity here and protesting in front of the Belarusian embassy in Vilnius, I already had more than 3 criminal cases open against me back home. And I was forced to apply for asylum because I did not see any opportunity to go back home, even despite the fact that I was waiting for the democratic transition, when the political horrors in Belarus finally stop and it's safe to go back. I saw that it's expanding in time year after year, but the danger was growing. And suddenly I saw myself on the state propaganda TV. And that was the point of no return when I realized, okay, now I'm becoming a refugee from the point of being just a migrant. And my life starts a new encounter. Did it change something in my day-to-day life? Almost nothing. But in my perception of reality, from that point, it was a long-term plan of staying in Lithuania because of the circumstances. And then on top of that, the war happened, and the Belarus became a co-aggressor. So the regime that was oppressing its own citizens became a co-aggressor. And what happened then is that the attitude of Lithuanian society changed drastically from the helping hand and from the solidarity towards poor Belarusians fleeing their country. We became the new enemy, in a way. It was the first time when I witnessed a hate speech against Belarusians in different situations. It was the first time when the approach towards me in my everyday life became more hostile. And when the first time I was asked, once speaking Russian, to anybody whether I'm Ukrainian, and if the answer is not, it doesn't matter if I'm the victim because I come from the co-aggressor country. So I am an enemy then. And this is the topics that I would focus on. I'm sure we will have further discussion on the integration means that the Belarusians are lacking, but in terms of answering your question towards the attitude, it changed a lot to worse.
And how community feels about the changing, if you heard some...
People from Belarus started to close up on their own. We started protesting less. I was recently making an interview with the shop owner of the different products with the Belarusian and Ukrainian symbolic on it, t-shirts, cups, bags, and whatsoever. And they confessed that people are buying less of symbolic with the words Belarus written. And people do not want to show that they are coming from Belarus because they are afraid of the hostility. Or sometimes people even went to acting being Ukrainian instead of saying that their story. People are tired of explaining that we are the victims, we were imprisoned for nothing, we were beaten up, we were deprived of home, we got repressions towards our family members, and we are the ones who need help, attention, solidarity, and empathy. Towards just saying, yeah, I am from Ukraine, to get a better treatment. And I witnessed such cases myself, and I was shocked of that. I never hide that I'm Belarusian, and I'm not tired to explain what's going on in my country, but many people are. So they just hide and become invisible from the one side. From the other side, there are many symptoms of the positive discrimination towards Ukrainians because they get an exclusive discounts and rights which Belarusians do not have, even though being the same kind of refugees. And many of my friends get offended because they donate for Ukraine, because our friends went to help the Ukrainian army and now serve in the military in Ukraine. And from them, there are many Belarusian refugees to Lithuania who went to Kyiv in the first months of the war to join the fight on the Ukrainian side. And then living in the societies that differentiate them in a bad way is quite dramatic for some people. And I think many of them face psychological challenges because of firstly feeling lost. Because you are losing your country when you move, then there is a bit of language barrier sometimes, and now this war situation when you have no certainty on your future. And then if you're also not being welcomed same way as other refugees, then you basically close up on your own.
So let's give the word to Dmytro. Today, I think that we have completely different situation than we're talking about Ukraine refugees. But when we talk about numbers, in Lithuania today we have 60,000 Belarusians and about 60,000 Ukrainians living here. So equal almost. So what's your story, Dmytro, when you come here in Lithuania, and how do you yourself integrate in the community, Ukrainian community?
Ukrainian or Lithuanian?
Ukrainian first.
Okay. Well, thank you first of all for the invitation. Also, it's a privilege for me also to speak out. I would like first to make a remark. I'm not actually a refugee Ukrainian because I came here first in 2019, and then my last arrival was in 2021 when I came for PhD studies. So I don't actually have any benefits that provided by the Temporary Protection Directive also. But I would like to focus, of course, on the point of the Ukrainian number of people in this country, because I also work scientifically wise on my thesis, which is aiming to explore how the Ukrainian youngsters integrate into the Lithuania, into in the country across the communities, and what's going on with young people, what kind of challenges they interface, what happens with them afterwards, where do they go, is Lithuania is a final destination or it's only a transit point, and all the other issues. So what I can say that, of course, the perception of Ukrainians, I would say worldwide, has changed after the full-scale invasion. There was also a remark here in the beginning that the war started on 24th of February 2022. This is not actually true, because the war started in 2014 in Ukraine. And I'm internally displaced person in Ukraine, so I had to escape from my place of residence in 2014. And well, I have not witnessed invasion of 2022, but still can talk a lot on that regard as well. My experience is quite positive so far, my personal experience. I cannot really complain. I would say even that I'm sort of privileged, because I came first time in 2019. I did volunteering for 2 months. Then I came in 2020 while I was writing my master's thesis, and I did a field work research here, let's say. And after graduating from my master's, I applied to continue my academic track also in Lithuania, because I was writing my master thesis about migration dynamics across Poland, Lithuania, and Ukraine. And when I arrived, let's say last time in 2021, I believe I felt as an ordinary Ukrainian on that time, because I live also in Kaunas, and that was pretty much different in 2021 at least, because Vilnius, historically wise, and also somehow by default has a more prevailing number of Ukrainians in itself, while Kaunas, when I have arrived, I have just faced few Ukrainians, for the city, and you would never ever hear Ukrainian language, for instance, on the streets as well. Yet it has changed, of course, and going back to the integration discourse, from the academic point of view, I usually try to question all of the notions, that I hear. And I sometimes question also the notion of integration by itself. Like, what does it mean? Maybe we should talk more about inclusion rather than integration. Whether integration is a proper term at all to refer to. Well, since it's accepted by the global and wide community, let's say, let's keep up with this. And in my opinion, the integration is always the bilateral, continuous, process. It's not a project, as Karolis has mentioned. And the desire and the willingness to be integrated or to be included into the community usually should be coming from both sides, not only from the Lithuanians who are hosting basically Ukrainians, but also Ukrainians who should be demonstrating some sort of will to become, more and more accepted or integrated into the community, regardless of their place of residence in Lithuania. I'm targeting within my academic research the youth group, so from 18 to 30 years old. And I can tell you that majority of my respondents, whom I was collecting data while carrying out semi-structured interviews, I have come up to conclusions that 85-90% of people do not feel integrated in Lithuania. And they express about that clearly.
And why they are not?
There is a list of the reasons. I mean, first of all, a lot of people talk that the language barrier is quite tough for young people. Especially, I would say it's more reasonable when we talk about Kaunas, Klaipėda, other municipalities than Vilnius. Because in Vilnius, whenever I was also talking to young people, they tend to say, okay, I can manage it in Russian in the everyday life. I mean, it's not really complicated. But when it comes to the other municipalities, and especially I have managed also to reach some Ukrainians who are living in the small municipalities, like 10, 15, 20,000 of people, where basically they don't have any other choice than to speak Lithuanian. And they really struggle. They really say that it's difficult, it's complicated, but we are doing our best also. And we feel support of Lithuanian community from the other side. So this bilateral process is continuing, let's say, in the different dimensions. The other point, I mean, one of the challenges also is the, for instance, healthcare system. And whenever it comes to the students, like me, for instance, I am holding the residence permit as a researcher, not as a temporary protection directive. And I'm a third country national. I'm non-EU citizen. So I cannot, as a third country national, I'm not allowed to have this social security number or social security card. And whenever I have to reach out, for instance, any healthcare services, I always have to pay in most of the cases. So I go to the hospital. I mean, of course, that might be the state one or the private one, but I always have to leave some money over there, right? And this is another aspect. There are some Ukrainians, for instance, who are combining work and studies at the same time. And this is a vast majority as well, I should admit that. So if they are registered, for instance, as a self-employed individuals, they do play out, for instance, with access to the healthcare, given the fact that they're just self-employed. So they pay some certain amount of tax. And of course, they have access to the also free healthcare, so they can go to the hospitals. But if you are, for instance, just a student without temporary protection directive benefits, you're a third country national. I'm not saying that I'm struggling, but this is just a point of fact. And some of the youngsters also have mentioned to me that came here in 2019 and 2020, because in my research, I'm targeting actually both categories, the ones who arrived before here and the ones who came after 2022. Yeah, maybe I will pass the floor and we can, of course, continue about it.
Bella, maybe you can add, we heard some problems and issues which Ukrainian are facing in the integration process. Is the same for Belarusian community?
For Belarusian community, it's quite different. Firstly, because we don't have the temporary protection directive applied. So vast majority of Belarusians have so-called humanitarian visas or residence permit, which basically meet the same issues as those Ukrainians that Dmytro just mentioned, who have no access to the personal security number and so on. But we go beyond. For example, I am a self-employed refugee with the permanent residence permit and with social security number, and I cannot have bank account based on my country of citizenship, just because my country is co-aggressor and there is no clear banking policy. So when I turn to SEP and I say, hey, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a refugee, this is my permanent residence permit card, can I please open a bank account? It was at the time, by the way, when I was into integration program as a refugee at the Red Cross, and we made a lot of official communication with the SEB bank, and they said that no, the bank policy is such that Belarusian citizens, despite of their migration status, cannot have access to the banking services. It's one of the examples. Another example is that we don't have the quota system at all. Whether we are refugees or migrants, we don't have the access to the separate queues in the medical facilities. So those who have refugee status, and it's a very small amount of Belarusians actually, because getting a refugee status for Belarusian is quite a process. It's not given automatically as a short-term protection to the war refugees from Ukraine, but you need to document well-grounded fear and ongoing persecution. It's not enough if you've been imprisoned back in 2020 for several months or weeks. You need to have an evidence of criminal case being open or other types of evidence that the repression is continuous. And not so many people can provide it, if at all. So those people, of course, have the access again to the medical services. Others don't even have a specific type of insurance, like let's say in Poland, because in Poland they introduced a special private medical insurance for Belarusians, precisely because it's so many in Poland. And in Lithuania, there is nothing like this. So the same issue. We also don't have the quota in terms of the access to the higher education. So whenever there is a scholarship, typically today, there is a quota for admission of a certain number of the Ukrainian applicants to show the solidarity. But I heard that some refugees from Russia and from Belarus who faced persecution at home and were able to actually prove it to get their status were rejected with the explanation that there is a quota per year and the quota is given to Ukrainians. More than that, we don't even have the access to the language courses, which are organized for many Ukrainian groups, but not for Belarusian groups, and they were not organized nor in 2021 in the pre-war times. So the only way for Belarusians, very limited amount of possibilities to study the Lithuanian language with help of the Belarusian NGOs or within the integration process as a refugee. And I could go ahead for a long time.
Let's stop here. I want to ask Karolis. Actually, it's very difficult to understand for why we have so different systems, so different procedures for Ukrainians, for Belarusians, for Afghans, for Syrians. Why it's so difficult?
All right, just a couple of things. I mean, to understand the whole logic of temporary protection, because temporary protection is a legal instrument at the EU level, which helps to reduce the pressure on the asylum system. Yeah, that's exactly what the EU has been doing with the Temporary Protection Directive, and other countries as Norway, they have similar procedures to reduce the system, to reduce the pressure on the system, because you cannot process millions of refugees and asylum seekers through mainstream asylum system. It's not possible. So the TP, or temporary protection, is basically that instrument. And it has never been applied before. So basically all of us, we are participating in solidarity and social experiment, and we still don't know actually what will happen very soon when the logically temporary protection should end, because the logic of TP is that it shouldn't last more than for a few years. And very soon we will have to come up with a very strategic and serious decision what will happen after that. Will all these people be given the refugee status, all those millions? I'm not so fully convinced, because of the lack of the political will across European Union member states, or we will continue with certain, other alternatives as TP or similar. So that is very important, and that's why neither Afghans nor Belarusians, they are part of the temporary protection directive, system. So that's very important. And I was very happy that both Bella and Dmytro, they've emphasized those very different approaches. And I would say that, of course, perhaps Eglė will tell you about that, we have, specific laws on that, and that's also part of the EU asylum framework. But at the same time, I would say that we still are paying the price of project-based nature of integration system, which has been in place since the beginning of when first refugees came to Lithuania. Yeah. So that means that, you have evacuated Afghans. You have one project which is run by the Red Cross. You have then, the TP framework, which has totally different legal setup, and which is quite logical because of my previous mentioned arguments. And then you have, other refugee groups and etc. And by the way, what we have been observing is that Belarusian community has always been relying more on informal integration structure on the Belarusian NGOs, which are working both regionally and locally and nationally. And I think that, I'll just tell you one simple thing. I spent the whole week in Jakobstad, quite distant place in Finland, like 5 hours with the train, where we brought the Lithuanian delegation of integration actors from Akmenė district municipality, including vice mayors, to learn how the Finnish municipalities has been welcoming refugees. And that was very interesting to see what is the huge difference between the systems, but also between the approach, because Akmenė has been always emphasizing Ukrainians because they have been welcoming Ukrainians since 2014. And then, of course, Jakobstad region looks with the 5 municipalities, and they have a decentralized mainstream system. And if completely illiterate refugee from the UN refugee quota is coming because they are part of the United Nations Commissioner Settlement scheme, if they come through that quota, or if Ukrainian is coming, or people from other countries are coming, they just want an integration port with the integration team, and they are addressing all those people, all those refugees within the one approach. And I mean, if you have a temporary protection, of course, those people, they're eligible to certain things that others are not eligible, but they still have one window principle at the municipality where they accept all people, and then the NGOs are helping out, and then Ukrainian community comes, or the other communities are coming, and that's where you have, as I say, quite stable system. But the stable system is a consequence of the governmental strategy that, we really want to have this as part of the institutional framework. And what I'm trying to say here is that if you look at any economical logic of public policy making, it's very simple. If you're investing €1 billion into public transportation, you expect that public transportation system will last forever. But what we're doing now is basically we're still working on the Ukrainian specific system under the TP framework, yeah? But logically, when you consider that the government and the European Union is investing, and by the way, private sector is investing millions of euros, you really logically and economically want that the system in the longer run will serve to everybody. Perhaps in Bulgaria, they could serve for Roma people. In Lithuania, perhaps they could serve also Belarusians and for Afghans and etc. So that's the whole logic that we really, as a UN refugee agency, we really see the tremendous efforts done for the Ukrainian situation response. But we also see that logically and economically wise, you should create that system in that sense that would serve for the others. Because if you will invest millions of euros without any institutional memory, I'm not sure if this is very helpful for the entire inclusion environment. So I think this is where we should look, that this is a challenge, but you should use this as an opportunity to create a system because you have resources, and the municipalities and the government have already done tremendous job. So now there is a question how you will transfer all that from the either parallel or Ukrainian specific system to the long-term integration and inclusion vision.
And Eglė, I want to ask you, maybe you can give us some perspective from NGOs and from humanitarian organization side, because I can see that we quite often get some complaints from different societies that communities that we don't pay attention, or we can't give something for them, and it's difficult to explain to people that we have law and we have system. It's not so simply. So maybe you can give some perspective.
Before getting to this question, I wanted to a little bit reflect to your previous question. Why it happens so, right? The first thing is that, as Karolis was mentioning before, that we're creating laws for specific, I would say even nationalities, I would say probably. This is one thing. And if we look back to 2020, after the presidential election in Belarus, the problem is that they suddenly opened this humanitarian corridor. And for quite a while, I was not understanding what is this humanitarian corridor. We have this asylum system. We have people fleeing regime, right? We have persecution in Belarus. Why do we need this humanitarian corridor? And with what we ended up with Belarusians who had 3 different statuses. First one was humanitarian visa, another one residence permit on humanitarian ground, another one was asylum. And that's how, because of the migrational status, legal status, people were left aside from the integrational system. That's the only answer. Why was it done like that? We were discussing with Bella when arriving here. Maybe the question was of the costs, right? But what Karolis was saying today many times, that we need to invest to that if we want to have proper systems and then have some sort of the outcome of the integration, right? So this is just to reflect that usually it's about the migrational status, legal status, why we end up with different systems. So this is one thing. Second thing, yes, during these last few years, for the humanitarian organization, it was also quite complicated to provide assistance because donors were only, donating and giving you money for specific target groups. And then you end up with donations. And despite the fact that you have your fundamental principles for non-discrimination, impartiality, and things like that, you end up receiving the money for specifically devoting to different people. So we were actually trying to manage it internally to make sure that somehow we react to different needs of different nationalities and different people. But it was really challenging, and the disappointment was there in the communities. They didn't understand why it is like this.
And publicly, we often have heard that Lithuania is transit country. This argument is still valid for today?
Well, if you look in the numbers, in 2018, I took the statistics of the last 5 years. We have 50,000 residents from with different origins in Lithuania. In 2023, we have 189,000 people. It's just the question of how we are looking into the integration of all of those people, not necessarily having the refugee status or different protection, in my opinion, and what Dmytro was saying, right, and what Bella was saying, and with Ukrainians, what happened after this temporary protection. If, for example, the status is changed to work or studies or family reunification, whatever, what happens with the integration of those people? And I don't think that somebody is discussing that right now, because if the status is changing, automatically they are not allowed to different services and different benefits from the integrational point of view. So I think that that's what shows that having this fragmented, only nationally orientated systems, we're not going anywhere. I mean, that has to be a mainstream. There has to be a services depending on people's needs and support for the integration.
Okay, so before giving floor for our audience questions, I want to ask one more question for all of you. Based on your experience, what recommendations would you give to the government, to society, to ensure that migration processes for refugees like yourself is effective and achievable?
Well, basically, all the recommendations could be summed up with 2 key points. First, we need to make surveys and actually ask the diaspora residing at the given point of time what are their needs. There is a high need in study and in dialogue creation to evaluate what policies are effective and what policies are less effective, and what is missing for this particular group, this particular nation, regardless of their migration status, because we should not only integrate the refugees, but also the residence permit holders. And the second point is that we need to involve more Belarusians in the advisory services, same way as today we involve Ukrainian employees, because Belarusians were excluded from the process when they could actually be part of the stakeholder team and when the consultations could be given, because all the role of that is only being limited to the political negotiations with the leader of Belarusian diaspora, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, but nobody ever asked a Belarusian expert Nobody asked me as a migration expert. Nobody asked our experts in other fields like sociology and economy what would be their suggestion. And I think they should be part of the decision-making process as a long-term residents of Lithuania and as an experts who know the needs of the diaspora.
Karol.
Yeah, I think this is a very brilliant suggestion, as we say that, nothing about us without us. So I think, we really need to have this inclusive environment where, people to whom the integration policy is targeted, they should be part of the policy dialogue and the policy development. I think that's of course clear. So I will not repeat it. What I will say perhaps is that I'm really looking, always we have first times. Yeah. It has been the first time ever we had an integration action plan. We were really happy about that, etc. I really hope that very soon we will face the first integration law, which will definitely stipulate very clear roles and responsibilities, who's responsible for integration and what those responsible actors should be doing. So I think this is clearly can really help to create this more mainstream decentralized system, which will be working not as a, within the context of the project-based nature, but more as the mainstream situation. So I think that's where it's very important. But the most important thing, I think, that we really need to look at our education system overall, which should reflect diversity, the contemporary version of the diversity in our society. And I think this is where, we have a lot of prejudices and attitude, which, which end up also in the policy dialogue. And that's where you have some, refugee or migrant groups who are benefiting more or less. And this is the same as I mentioned, the debate, if you can compare the debate between the resettlement of Syrians and now temporary protection for Ukrainians, we have totally different political will. So I think, and this is where the education comes in, that we should really, focus on, if the person comes through in the framework of the Geneva Convention, or so, everybody should be treated in that way, no matter you are from Afghanistan or from other country. But, as long as we still have this, the gap, and that we do not reflect properly diversity, I think that's where, we will have, we'll have those problems. And I think perhaps Vita also can help me to quote the research, but there has been ongoing monitoring of public opinion in Lithuania, and you see that, the society is much more willing to accept the, resettlement and the relocation of refugees from Christian countries, from Catholic countries, rather than from the Islamic countries. And the gap is really, really huge. So that's basically a mirror of our perhaps local and national level policies that, sometimes that might be fragmented, as Eglė says, because of the nationalities and etc. So I think, in addition to that, we would really need to focus on the education as well.
Eglė.
I will be more pragmatic. I think that we are quite on the right track with the mainstreaming and including municipalities. The only thing which I see lacking, the tools and the standards for municipalities, because if we look right now, and if we would have somebody today from different municipalities, their experience and what they are doing and why they are doing it would be completely different. So we don't have this support the municipalities and how exactly to be involved in integration. And when you are saying the successful examples, I think they are successful, first of all, because those are the smallest and they have a very small numbers. And then if you have thousands of people living, I think that's where the challenges are. So my recommendation would be not only to include municipalities, what we are doing right now, but also to support them with tools, to support them with standards, and to support them with capacity building, because that's another issue which we had throughout the year, that we invested a lot into the buildings and we have not invested in the capacities of how to do the things. So I think that that's another aspect what we lack and what we should do next.
Thank you, Dmytro.
Well, first of all, human-centric approach, because migration, integration, it's at the end about human being, social being, right? And if we will be aiming to improve the system, maybe that is correct. That is what we have to do. But at the end of all of these processes, there is a beneficiary who is a human being. So therefore, I believe it's important to also keep an eye on the needs of people primarily, regardless of their nationality, where they come from, etc. Secondly, the importance of the cross-sectoral cooperation is quite important. Government, international organizations, academia, civil society, and other stakeholders, who could be involved. I hear already here the quite good practices. We just have to push them forward, and to extend them. Last but not least, we need strategic vision. Migration is a phenomenon, in my opinion. It will not end tomorrow or after tomorrow or in 1 week or in 1 month. It's good that we try also to address it with ad hoc measures, to try to help something there, to try to fix something over there, to try to mitigate a fire on the spot. But I believe that, and it goes basically to the EU level, I would say, if we're talking about European Union, there should be understanding basically how to deal with the migration flows, for instance, on the long-term perspective. By closing the borders, I'm not sure that we can, stop the inflow of migrants, for instance, or to do something else. Because the grassroots reasons why people escape and why people flee and why they go away, they are not also disappearing, they only go up. That means that more and more people will be looking for the safe spaces, for the safe places all across the globe. And European Union, trust me, I moved quite a bit around across the globe as well. European Union is the best place, in my opinion, to plan your life overall. Therefore, strategic vision and more long-term understanding, and this relates also to Lithuania, apparently, that the country on the national level perhaps has to reconsider a little bit how does it see migration policies, integration processes, and what are the potential trends that may come up in 10 years. I understand it's almost impossible to have a look what will happen in 10 years. But regardless of whether it's complicated or not, we have to try at least to make this anticipation.
Okay, thank you. And we have time for audience question. Maybe someone want to ask.
Hi, thank you for your insights and for your work that you do in the field of integration of refugees. Well, I researched the integration myself, and if I researched military conflicts around Europe and the world. So if we look at the average duration of a military conflict, it's around 17 years. But the policies that are adopted by European unions, they are short-term in nature. Well, if we see at who is coming to countries of the European Union, they are women and children predominantly. And when children arrive into the countries, there is a question of their identity development and national identity development. But when they come to the new country, they have trauma, and they have trauma of living in a new country and the trauma they bring with them. How do you see the process of their national identity development once they arrive in the host country, considering that their stay will be long-term? Thank you.
That's perhaps the whole concept of multicultural or intercultural integration, or as Dmytro said, inclusion. I would say for me, it's as simple as it is. So where you have two pluses, yeah. So where the community, minority, or whatever, a migrant group or refugee community, it maintains its own culture, but at the same time it interacts with the new culture. So that's where it's perhaps outdated, but still the integration and inclusion as a two-way process that works. So for me, the development of national identity is as simple as it is. You have your own, but you're part of the new one. But that's the same from the majority of the society, that they should also receive, learn, and also become kind of the also part of the belonging of that community, that you would be talking about one community instead of minority and majority. And I would honestly tell you, for me, that's why basically the whole European Union is moving towards inclusion rather than integration, because integration, which comes from the Chicago School of Sociology, by the way, in the 60s and 70s, you know, it always had let's say, a context of the melting pot in the system of America, yeah, because you have Irish, Italians, Lithuanians, Polish, who created something which is called now an American. But that was integration in the context of the melting pot, where integration meant that always belonged to the society. When you're bringing the integration to the nation state, you are placing the integration in the institution, and that means that inevitably you have power relations between minority and majority, and that's very, very not helpful to kind of have this, you know, intercultural dialogue. So I think, you know, we really need to see that, you know, it's very easy to say that, you know, you have your own culture, but also taking something new from the new country. But at the same time, you have to really, really address in a horizontal way the concept of the power relation, that you wouldn't have somebody who is integrating you is here and somebody who should be integrated here. So that should be on an equal matter. And that's where I would say you could have this inclusive environment, you know, for the hybrid identity. That would be my answer. But I'm sure that you also know that politically it's very difficult to reach that, especially with the diverse groups of migrants and refugees arriving to Europe now.
Hello, thank you for discussion. It is very important to hear on the stage the same topics as we have internally in our scape about the different perceptions to different groups of refugees and to the fragmented integration system. My question would be maybe to Bella and Dmytro about the perception of from within the communities to each other, you know, because as we're organizing different activities, we deal with on monthly basis with cases where Ukrainians refuse to be in the same camps or groups with Belarusians, you know, and so on. And the question would be maybe, how do you feel, you know, near each other as the representatives of communities, and how do you see the future of coexistence, not only with Lithuanians, but within, you know, community?
Mm-hmm. I would really like to take 20 seconds to also respond to previous question, because when we speak on the identity in Belarusian case, I'd like to mention two examples of how it was here in the couple of years. Firstly, the reception that was given to Belarusians was not institutionalized in 2020, 2021. So basically the reception that was given to Belarusians was given to them by Belarusian diaspora instead of local institutions. It was Belarusians who resided here in the previous waves of migration after 2006 and earlier. And now we have a discussion right now in the parliament on the creation of the Belarusian school. And here the children would study in the Belarusian school. And we also have the Belarusian University in exile here, the Europos Humanitarinės Universitetas. And it creates a Belarusian bubble inside of Lithuania and disintegrates Belarusians from the society. So just for your research, it's a nice examples of how the bubbles are being created, and they serve the opposite goal of integration. For the question on the diaspora, as co-organizer of the first anti-war meeting on February 27, 2022, and the host of this event that included the mixed diaspora of Belarusians, Russians, Ukrainians, and locals against the war and Russian invasion, I could say that at the beginning of the war and today, it was changing with the number of Ukrainian and Russian refugees coming as an outcome of what's going on. And you can see my hand with two armbands, Belarusian and Ukrainian flag. And I always felt welcome at all Ukrainian events, and I attended so many. And the Ukrainian diaspora always came to Belarusian events. So we rather had a unified approach towards each other, especially after how large amount of Belarusians joined the war in Ukraine at the Ukrainian side. And it was rather the issue for me, also as for migration expert, not as for refugee, that the Russian refugees being the subject of hate speech and different approach that really bothers me and that really needs to be addressed, because there are so many victims of this military conflict also from the Russian side. Everybody in Russia who is opposing the military conflict are becoming refugees and getting criminal charges and being repressed and have to flee Russia. And we have the new diaspora in Lithuania emerging, Russian refugees who are against the war. So the hostility towards them from the Belarusian Ukrainian community is greater in proportions than between Ukrainians and Belarusians, I would say. Also, it can be explained by the ability of these two groups to speak our national languages without interpretation. If I speak Belarusian to Ukrainian and if Ukrainians speak Ukrainian to me, we understand each other 100% because of the proximity of our languages. It's so identical. By the linguistic study, it's identical up to 80%. Whilst if we speak to each other in our national languages in front of somebody from Russia, they would not understand most of what we say. And it creates this cultural difference. When it's a cultural or political gesture to not speak Russian language, there is a problem because we cannot integrate all three groups of refugees. So I would mention this example, but I would really like to know what Dmytro thinks about it from your experience.
It's a good question, thank you. I would split my answer in two parts. One more as an ordinary Ukrainian citizen who would try to generalize public opinion, let's say. And second would be more personal / academic. As a Ukrainian ordinary citizen, it's very sensitive, and there is quite an amount of hate and hatred towards the Russians and Belarusians. For the point is that there are missiles and rockets that are flying from the Belarus territory to Ukraine. Households are destroyed, cities razed to the ground. There are jets who are taken off from the Belarus side and send the missiles to Ukrainian territory. And all of that keeps going until nowadays. I mean, I don't want to generalize Ukrainian public opinion because we are also very diverse within Ukraine and the ones who are abroad right now. But in my perception would be that it's very sensitive and it just needs time. Just do not rush these processes. Do not try to force people to come together to the same table, because it may lead actually to the unwanted consequences. Academic / pragmatic, I'm totally okay to communicate with Belarusians. I have Belarusian friends, also colleagues, whom I'm in touch well, not on the everyday basis, but quite often, I would say. I understand that also as a young Ukrainian, at some point, we will have to sit around the same table and to discuss the way how we're going to live together in the next decades or centuries. Because there is a very simple example when I'm being asked, okay, what is your attitude towards Russians? It's something similar. As difficult as it might be, but we have to realize that we will not be able to move Ukraine and to switch at territories with Portugal or with Spain, for instance. Ukraine will be always in the same place as it is, with Belarus, with Russia by our side. and we will have to deal with that. We will have to find a way how we will be able to coexist on the long-term perspective. And I don't want to deny or to argue with people who are very, who are quite aggressive towards these both communities of the Belarusians and Russians, because they might be simply having the right for that. If they have lost everything, I'm not sure how I would react in this kind of situation. But from the other side, as far as the situation and circumstances allow, I'm more into the pragmatic, analytical / strategic approach for the finding the ways how we can coexist, at least coexist, not to have a friendship or to have mutual understanding, but just to live next to each other and, let's say, not to bother each other when it comes to the military means.
Yeah, so we are completely out of time, but I want to say thank you for all the panelists, for your great ideas and thoughts, and of course for the audience of paying attention for this important topic. So thank you all and have a great time in Diskusijų festivalis būtent.